I understand you might spend weeks making a character, carefully texturing every detail, but when it comes to rendering, everything can fall apart. The fear of not being able to present your work as it deserves, we've all been there. And the truth is, whether it's people or big studios, what matters most is the final result. That first visual impression is everything. So your presentation can either elevate your work or drag it down. And that's why in this video, I'm going to show you a fast and complete rendering workflow with Marmoset Toolbag, a simple but powerful render engine. We'll cover everything from material shading, lighting setup, camera setting, atmosphere, all the way to a polished final render. And if you don't know me, I'm a character artist with experience in several successful game and animation projects, and now I want to share the key things I've learned with you. So let's jump right into the first step. The first step is to prepare your model and decide how you want to render it. I mean, whether it's going to be rendered in a specific pose or in an A pose. You can even do both. It depends on how you want to present it. If you ask my opinion, something that has emotion and doesn't look like a stiff robot can make more attention. So once you've made your decision, select all the objects and export them as an FBX file. It doesn't matter if you're using Maya or Blender, the process is the same. One important note in the FBX export settings is to enable smooth groups and uncheck animation, since we don't need that. Now that our model is ready, open Marmoset and go to the File menu. Then click on Import and select your model. As you can see on the left side, all the objects are listed separately under the main FBX group. And on the right side, you will see all the materials that were assigned to the objects. As you know, assigning materials is done before the texturing stage. I've made a full video explaining the complete game character pipeline, so if you run into any issue, make sure to check it out after this video. Also, I should mention that this character was created by me and my good friend Arzu Hajian. We worked together on different parts of the project to achieve this result, and you can also check out our work on 80 levels page. The third step is to assign the textures to each material. If you want to figure out which material belongs to which part of the model, you can quickly change the material's color to identify the objects, or just use proper naming conventions. When you open a material, you will see the empty slots for each texture map. I'm going to click on the normal map slot, and in the window that opens, I'll navigate to where I exported my textures from Substance Painter. And as you can see, these are all texture maps for this character. I click on the normal map of the built material to select it. One very important thing to know about the normal map: when you export it from Substance using DirectX, you need to flip the white channel so it displays correctly in Marmoset. Then you can drag the base color into albedo map slot. As you can see, we export these maps for Unreal Engine. And the difference is that instead of 3 separate maps for roughness, metallic, and ambient occlusion, there is just one map, call it ORM. Of course, you can choose to export using the PBR method, where each map is separate, but with the ORM workflow, you only need one map that contains all 3 textures packed into RGB channels. Red channel for ambient occlusion, green channel roughness, blue for metallic. Just assign that single map into each of the 3 slots, and then manually select the correct channel for each one, as I explained. Alright, so we've just finished shading the first material. To speed things up, you can open the folder of your textures and drag it to your second monitor, and that way you can quickly drag and drop the maps into their correct slots. To save your time, I've already imported all the textures, and now the character is fully loaded, although it's still in its raw form. The final note about materials is that you can also enable the emissive channel and assign a map to it if you have one. I'm keeping things simple here, so it's easy to follow, but of course you can go much deeper with shading if you want. And that's it. Technically you can render and post your character right now, but the problem is it's so flat and it's look like a crap, and honestly you don't want to waste months of hard work, so let's make it look better. The next step is to find the right HDRI for your scene. You can either use one from Marmoset's built-in library or download one for free from a website like HDRI Haven or something like that, which is an excellent resource. Your job now is to test out different environments and see which one gives you the best reflections that match your character and the feel you're going for. Don't worry about the shape or image of the HDRI, only the lighting and reflection matter. I'm going to reduce the intensity of the skylight because I want to use it as fill light, just to make sure the character isn't too dark. We're not going to use only a skylight, this is just a starting point. I also recommend setting the mode to color, so you can use a solid color background for now, since our correct focus is on the character, not the environment. Before we move on to the next step, I asked my followers on Instagram what questions they had about rendering in Marmoset, and one of the questions was, how does Marmoset's rendering compare to Unreal Engine? To put it simply and clearly, Unreal offers more advanced and complete rendering settings. Also keep in mind Unreal is a game engine, so its rendering is more of a bonus feature, as explained in the full video I made on the game character pipeline. But if you're looking for fast results without all the complexity of shading and lighting setups, Marmoset is a better choice, and honestly it depends on your specific needs. Next question, how can I make the texture from Substance Painter look the same in Marmoset? The answer is the texture itself doesn't change. What changes is the lighting and contrast, which can heavily influence how we perceive the texture. It might seem different, but it's really the lighting doing the work. So in Substance Painter, try to adjust your lighting and viewport settings to match Marmoset as closely as possible. You can use some lighting presets, which I personally use to make the result look more like Unreal Engine. Then just apply a bit of color correction if needed. And another important point is, you should use the same environment. The next step is to add key light, rim light, and backlight to bring your character to life and get closer to the final look. If you are serious about lighting and want to see more examples, I found a professional and digital lighting reference image from the official digital camera website. I personally learned a lot from it. I've uploaded into my Google Drive, so I always have access to it. And the link is below the video. Feel free to download it in high quality and use it as a reference. The first light I'm going to add is the key light. You can create it by clicking this option here, which adds a new light from the camera view. It's a spotlight by default. If your light appears too big or too small compared to mine, it's because your character's scale is incorrect. To check this, go to the viewport settings and enable show scale reference. Then compare your character's size to Marmoset's reference model. You can scale your character up or down accordingly. It's not a big deal, but it helps keep things consistent if you want to fix it. Also make sure show guides is enabled, so you can actually see the lights in the viewport. I usually place the key light at about 45 degrees horizontally and also slightly above the character vertically. This creates a more cinematic effect and avoid a flat, boring look. I strongly recommended not placing the light directly in the front of your character, as that will make it look flat and artificial, like a mannequin. Once your light is positioned correctly, you can increase the spot angle to cover more of the character if needed. Next issue, when you zoom in, you will probably notice that the shadows are too sharp, and that just doesn't look appealing. You can fix that by increasing the diameter of the light. This will soften the shadows, but be careful, if you set it too high, the light may not work properly on your subject. As the name suggests, the key light is your main light source, so it should be the strongest among all your lights. I will explain more about fine-tuning in the next steps. To continue the lighting process, you'll need to set up your camera angle, the final view you want to present your character from. It's better to adjust lighting based on the final camera angle. There is default camera already created in the scene, and I'll just use that for now. The first thing I want to change is the lens. In portrait shots, it's common to use a lens like 55mm, 85mm, or even higher, so the subject's face doesn't get stretched and looks more like it would in real life. For example, if you set the lens to 100, you will notice the head looks very flat and doesn't appear stretched at all. On the other hand, if you use a lower facial length, the head will appear stretched, which is not good for close-up or focused shots. This can literally make your character look dumb, so lens settings are very important. I'm going to set it to 55mm because I want the character to have some depth and not appear completely flat. If my focus was only the face, I would probably bump it up to 100mm or something like that. The camera has more settings, but I will cover those later before we do the final render. If I enable safe frame, two white lines appear at the top and the bottom of the screen. This shows the visible area from the camera's point of view, and it depends on your render resolution settings. For example, my render is currently set to 4K landscape. If you want a square frame, just set the width and height to the same value, like 2000 by 2000. frames. I personally prefer to render in a landscape format so that I can crop the frame exactly how I want in Photoshop afterward. And one thing I forget to mention, ray tracing is enabled by default on my system, but for you it might be turned off. Make sure to turn it on because it makes a huge difference in reflections and shadows. I've now set the camera lens to 80mm because I want to test different results. Now that we have the main camera set, I click split vertical to divide the viewport into two. Then I duplicate the main camera and name it render 1. You can set the left viewport to render 1 so you can always see your final composition. And in the right viewport, you can use the default camera to move around the scene and adjust lighting or anything else without touching the main camera angle. Even you can click the lock icon to freeze all camera movements so nothing gets moved accidentally in the viewport. You can also turn off safe frame if you want a wider view while walking. Now that we have a rough idea of the final camera angle, I want to add a backlight to give the character more depth. I rotate the camera and move behind the character from the direction where I want the light to hit. The nice thing here is that the light is created from your current camera view, which is super helpful. To adjust each light more easily, you can turn off the other lights and focus on the one you're working on. I increase the intensity a bit and adjust the angle so it lights up the edge of the character. I can also soften the shadows to make things more interesting. I might tint the color slightly toward blue or any color you feel matches your character better. The next light that can make your character even more appealing is the top light, which shines from above the character's head. Position the camera accordingly and then click to create a new light. Turn off the other lights again to focus just on this one. Soften the shadows and increase the intensity of it. You will see the effect on the character, and the nice thing is it can create good reflections on the surface. Of course, this depends on your roughness map and your model's materials. At this point you can call it done and post the results. Compared to where we start, this looks much better with a clean standard lighting setup. You can easily see the details and the character has depth now. But let's push it even further. You can even duplicate your render camera and change its angle. This is great if you want multiple shots from different angles. Important point, if you want to render back of your character, don't rotate the camera to back because your lighting was set up from the front. Instead, rotate the character itself and use the same lighting setup to get the render from behind. Now I can duplicate the backlight and move it to the opposite side of the character to better define the silhouette and outer shapes. I might even change its color to something closer to red for a more dynamic look. Now the lighting has reached a nice level, it's time to add some atmosphere and fog to give the character a more natural feeling and make the environment look a bit more realistic. You can right click in outliner and select add fog. By default the amount is too strong, so you'll need to adjust it. With fog enabled, you can clearly see the light fall off lines, which is very useful. The first thing I want to change is the fog color. I might shift it slightly towards blue or green. Then I'll adjust the distance to control how far the fog reaches. I don't want the scene to be overly foggy or make the character hard to see, so I reduce it a bit. Again, this totally depends on your character and the method you're aiming for. Also, if the fog feels too dense, you can reduce the opacity or make it softer. Now our lights have a nice fall off and the scene has more natural atmosphere compared to before. Once I have almost everything ready for the final render, I go back and start adjusting everything from the top and trying to improve as much as possible. The first thing I want to change is the background. It feels too solid right now, so I'll switch to using the environment texture instead. I can make it a bit darker so it doesn't draw too much attention and the focus stays on the character. I will also increase the blur so the background appears softer and less distracting. To give the character more dimensionality and avoid flat lighting, I'm going to duplicate the key light and use it specifically for the face. I'll narrow the angle, raise the light higher and position it so it only lights the face, just creating a focused highlight on the character's face. I also boost the intensity of the backlights a bit to make them stand out more and give the silhouette more shape. The final light I want to add is a light source behind the character to give the background more depth and make one area slightly brighter. Change the light type from a spot to omni so it acts like a 360 degrees light source. Then I move it behind the character and check its placement using the final camera angle. The intensity of this light shouldn't be too strong, just enough to brighten the area behind the character slightly compared to the rest of the scenes. The camera actually has some special settings that allow us to make the image sharper, more vibrant, and visually appealing, so there is no reason to ignore it. The first thing I want to enable is post effect. I can click on any part of the character using the middlemost button and it will focus on that area. The further objects are from that focus point, the more they get blurred. Activating this isn't mandatory, but it can help add depth and focus to your scene. You can also hold shift and right click to rotate the environment and try different background reflections if you're not satisfied with the correct one. Next, you can scroll down and increase the camera exposure a bit to brighten the image. Then slightly increase the highlights to see the difference. You can always test different values and notice how it affects your render. By lowering the midtones, you can add more contrast and get rid of the flat look. But be careful not to overdo it, or it will look too artificial. Of course, you could do all this in Photoshop after rendering, but I personally prefer to make the real-time version inside the engine as close as possible to the final result. If you compare the default camera with the enhanced one, you will immediately see the difference. The result looks much better. One of the cool settings that can make everything feel a bit more epic is bloom. Increase it just a bit to make the highlights pop and everything shine more. The grain setting adds some subtle noise to the image, which helps reduce the too much or too solid look, but again, don't overdo it. And that's it for the camera settings. Now if you switch between your cameras, you will see how much more alive and polished your scene looks. Color correction can have a huge impact on your character, but many people overlook it. Don't make that mistake. At this point, I can delete the third camera and just duplicate the second one to keep its settings. Or if you don't want to lose a specific camera angle, you can just copy the setting instead. And also you can explore more angles for your character. There is no limit here. Just make sure you find a visually interesting one that highlights your work well. And before we move to the final step, let's answer a question from one of the followers. How can I prevent Marmoset from crashing? I've experienced it myself before, and in my case, it was mostly because of low VRAM on my GPU. When the scene becomes too heavy, Marmoset would crash. Unfortunately, there is no magic fix, and my advice is either work more optimized or consider upgrading your graphic card, my friend. The final step is rendering setup, and that's it. You can either copy my setting exactly or adjust them based on your own needs. There are a few important things to clarify. First are the cameras that will handle the render. I don't want the main camera to be rendered, so I can either add my 3 main cameras and turn off the main one, or just delete it. You also need to decide what render passes you want. Right now, wireframe is active, but I really don't want to upload the topology of this character in my presentation, so I don't need it. I only want final composite to be active. Of course, if you need other passes like AO, ID map, or other channels, you can enable them as needed. If you want to include the Marmoset label under your image, you can add it here and adjust its size and position, or you can add it later in Photoshop. That part is optional. I'm keeping the render resolution at 4K because I need a high level of detail, and I recommend you do the same. Don't worry about the big frame, you can crop it in Photoshop later and keep just the part you want. I'm disabling the transparency option because when it's enabled, the background gets removed and only the character remains, and I don't want that in this case. I'm setting the output format to PSD. You could go with EXR2 for a slightly more detail, but never choose JPEG because it lowers the quality of light and shadow fall off. Choose your render location and start the render. The rest depends on your graphic card or CPU. Personally, I use an RTX 5080 with a Ryzen 9 7950X CPU, which gives me incredible speed, just in case you were curious. And anyway, rendering is finished, and let's see the final result. I hope this tutorial has answered all your questions and helped you solve your problems you were facing. You can always come back to it and follow the workflow whenever you need. And if you've made it this far, it means you're truly serious about learning character design. And that sets you apart from the other. I highly recommend checking out my full game character design pipeline video. It will give you a clear path and a bigger picture of the entire process. And you know, the rest is just practice and do it again and again and again. You can be the best, because most people don't want to step out from their comfort zone and make it hard on themselves. So winning is easy right now. And remember, friend, your future is looking you. Give them something to be proud of.